Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for a very special panel of broadcaster CEOs this morning, part of an event series running this week that sees the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky and STV in association with Albert and Natural Capital Partners coming together to discuss how they're collaborating on the climate change emergency. You can head to wearealbert.org/events for info on this and all of the other panels streaming this week. Now, for the past 10 years, through Albert, the Screen Industry Organisation for Environmental Sustainability, these broadcasters have been working on initiatives to reduce their carbon footprint and to create content that supports a vision for a sustainable future. And they've joined me this morning to tell us more about that and also to make a very exciting announcement. A groundbreaking creative commitment that places climate change at the very heart of programming. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Tim Davie from the BBC, Carolyn McCall, ITV, Alex Mann, Channel 4, Simon Pitts, STV, and Stephen van Rooyen from Sky. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining me this morning. Perhaps we should start with the BBC, Tim, as the original creators of Albert, and to talk a little bit about the past 10 years of Albert. So back in 2011, you made an agreement to create this carbon calculator for the television industry. Tell me how the decision came about and how Albert has evolved over the past 10 years.
I think it was a classic case of, it wasn't grand corporate strategy at the time, I'll be honest. It was a group of passionate individuals, as ever in life, who were well ahead of their time and just said, we want to do something here. We believe in it. So it was the case of actually, you know, just some brilliant teams getting together. BAFTA was involved. And it was a simple thing, which is, you know, if you look at what we do as an industry, we make a lot of television programs, and you see these trucks, you see it all there as we walk around it, and they saw a lot of energy being used, and they said, how do we get this down? It was as simple as that. And over the years, with the help of Albert, and it's all grown now, and I think he's really at the centre, certainly as someone who ran BBC Studios for a while, in my second half of my tenure, it suddenly was very important, you know, to set targets on how many productions were 3-star Albert certified. And at that point, you've got an increasing level of sophistication. The other simple point I'd make is, and I'm sure everyone feels it, is if you don't measure it, it don't happen. And I really believe that to my soul. If you don't measure stuff, you don't set targets, if you don't... And there's a lot of people who will say, oh, look, it's not perfect, or it doesn't matter. Get going, get measuring, get it sorted. And that team made a real difference, and it's been improved, and it will keep improving. I think people will constantly tweak it, but overall now, if you make a production at the BBC or any of the companies are on this panel, I'm sure, it is a centrepiece of what you do when you plan the production. And that's changed forever now.
And Carolyn, you were one of the early members of Albert as well, and ITV set themselves ambitious targets. Tell me about those and how that journey has evolved for ITV.
Yeah, so we started working with Albert in 2011, so very similar to the BBC, and I think, like Tim, it was production-driven. I think we have been working quite hard on articulating our social purpose. I think purpose has been very clear as a public service broadcaster for many, many years, but actually the articulation of that has not been as clear. And we got a lot of people involved at ITV, and one of the key elements was social purpose in terms of climate action and in terms of inclusion and diversity. So those are two things that our own people helped us define. So we are, you know, we've made our commitments last year about net zero, about 100% renewable energy by 2030, zero waste by 2030, 100% sustainable supplier base, which is much more difficult, but also setting time targets on that. 100% training, so just making sure everyone, and we call it climate action instead of climate change, because we want our people to take action through the training, not just lecture them about what they should be doing. So we've got all of those commitments. I completely agree with Tim about measurement, which is where Albert is so important, but also about disclosure. I think disclosure is incredibly important to all of us, because once you've disclosed your targets, which we've done already, we won't wait till 2023, we start being measured externally as well as internally about that, and that's quite galvanizing. And so that's been really, really critical for us. And then, of course, you know, we have a big pledge on screen as well as behind the camera, off screen. So I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that.
We will indeed. Stephen, Sky was a member since the inception of Albert, and has done a lot of work through the Sky Zero campaign. Tell me what the biggest challenges have been, the biggest learnings, and of course the successes so far.
Yeah, look, I think we should probably go back in history a little bit. I think our involvement in the climate change agenda goes back all the way to 2006. We were the first carbon neutral media company in the world back in 2006. So we've been on a journey for a long period of time. Sky Zero is the latest manifestation of that. I mean, one of the big learnings I think is you sort of have to lead from the front. You have to have passionate people at the top with a clear vision about what you want to achieve, and you have to stay the course, I think, through it. So if you look at what we've done since that period of time, there's been manifestations, whether it be carbon neutrality, it was the rainforest and, Team Sky for a year. We dressed them in livery for that to bring attention to it. I went to ocean plastics. We took responsibility at that point, leading internally and externally with, for instance, both in our products and on our sites, getting rid of single-use plastics. And then, of course, the manifestation today is our pledge to be, I think we're amongst the first to pledge to be carbon neutral by 2030. And that's a big deal for an organization like ours, because we don't just have the broadcasting element part of it. We're in people's homes. Our products use a lot of electricity, all sorts of things. So the commitment to do that is a big undertaking on our part.
Okay, thank you. And Alex, Channel 4 works exclusively with independent production companies. Talk to me a little bit about how you go about engaging all of these different suppliers when it came to Albert at the beginning and now 10 years on.
Yeah, it's complicated for indies, right? We work with a few hundred indies a year. Often, and I used to run an indie, you don't necessarily have the infrastructure and the knowledge and the setup that big broadcasters have, where there are social purpose teams and everything. So our job is, as well as requiring of the indies to follow Albert, is to work with them to help do that and help make it practical and help work out how you do that and help talk about what's the cost of doing that and what does that mean on set. But obviously doing that with hundreds of indies has tremendous impact across the industry, because once the whole supply chain is doing it, it makes a difference to all of us. And that's an example where we're working together, which is unusual for us as competition. But it's a good example of where we can make a really, really big impact. But we have to do that with hundreds of indies, and they've been very receptive to it.
Changing fate of television collaborations like this.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Simon, STV have recently set their own net zero targets as well. Tell us about them and how important this collaboration is when it comes to really achieving results as quickly as is necessary.
Well, really important. And we are also committed to net zero by 2030, a concerted program of actions and targets. We're measuring absolutely everything, and we're delighted to be part of the Albert Consortium too. There's a lot we can do together and learn from each other, really. But it also starts with getting our own house in order. So for us, that means all of the off-screen targets and making sure that our energy usage is renewable. We're up at 97% renewable energy usage in our buildings in Glasgow and across Scotland from 7% only a year ago. So there's lots we need to do, first of all, to set our own stall out. But the most galvanizing thing, the most exciting thing is what we can do on screen, obviously, and that's where we really should come into our own, and I know we'll want to talk about that.
Well, it's a perfect segue. I'm just about to come to that. So thank you very much for sharing a little bit about what's been going on the past 10 years. But it does lead us to an announcement this morning, a creative initiative called the Climate Content Pledge. This is a new commitment with 12 signatories so far, including the 5 with me this morning, that places the reality of climate change at the very heart of all programming. So this pledge recognises the unique role of the TV and film industry to help audiences engage with our climate challenges and, more importantly, with the solutions that they can be a part of. So this pledge has 6 key principles that you can hopefully see on the screen behind me now, and I'm going to talk you through them a little bit. So the first is that more audiences will be reached with content that helps everyone to understand and navigate the path to net zero and inspires them to make greener choices. So the focus will be on genres like drama, soaps, comedy, magazine shows, and other genres that don't already cover climate change in order to increase these broadcasters' outreach. Secondly, More processes will be worked on and put in place to help teams to consider climate themes when commissioning, developing, and producing content. Thirdly, efforts will be informed by the science, and this is very important, of course. The latest IPCC report is clear about how urgent the climate crisis is. What happens over the next 5 to 10 years is critical, and ensuring that science-backed issues and narratives are focused on will be key to making the biggest difference. The fourth principle, the importance of fair and balanced representations of visions for a sustainable future, will be recognized. There will, of course, be dystopian dramas. There will be honest conversations about how we'll have to adapt to the changes that are already happening, but there will also be a lot of content about a positive future, and we need to be as inclusive so that everyone feels they can engage with the challenges ahead. Number 5 is all about collaboration, as we've been mentioning. Working together is fundamental to what has been achieved as an industry through Albert over the past decade, and this will continue to be crucial as these principles are actioned. And finally, number 6 is a commitment to talk about this, to keep communicating with colleagues, with partners, families, and of course with the audience. So, those are the key elements of the new Climate Content Pledge, focusing all efforts on what audiences see on screen. And let's find out more from our panel now. Carolyn, can I come to you first to ask you what inspired you to sign up to this particular pledge?
Look, I think it's a natural evolution of what we've already been doing. I mean, I think there's 2 ways to do this on screen. There's the way which is very overt, where you are actually doing programs on climate change and you're communicating and trying to change people's views. I think equally important is the more subtle messaging. So, for instance, Emmerdale has only used electric vehicles for the last 3 to 4 years. And that just subliminal message, which is electric is available, it's accessible, it's good, is a very important message. You know, if you look at our daytime programming over even just 2 years, the amount of vegetarian recipes that are coming through just naturally, so James Martin, you know, whoever, that is quite a powerful influence on consumer behaviour. And so what we're trying to do, I think, is in a very unlecturing, non-hectoring way, because I think Sky just did a report on nudge theory about consumers, and what they say is 80% of them are convinced this is the right thing, but they don't want to be lectured at. They want to be influenced and they want to participate in this. So I think that those are the kinds of things. They sound small. Of course, we'll still do the big pieces. So Joanna Lumley and the Human Swan, which did really, really well. That was on Monday night. That was a really following a climate activist, and then is very moving program, actually. And we'd call that factual entertainment. So things will fit in all of that. And one other example I'd give is, you know, Laura Tobin, who's known for weather. People make the mistake of underestimating weather presenters. She's a scientist, really. And she went to the Arctic to bring the Arctic into everyone's living rooms. And it was so powerful seeing global warming in the Arctic. So that she did that through her weather broadcasting, which is not news, it's but it's every day. So those are things that are quite powerful. You know, this morning buying a forest and reporting from a forest, then showing, you know, bringing viewers into that. That's the kind of thing I think we're kind of evolving into, which is why the pledge is just a natural thing for us, I think, to sign. It just felt as if it was the next chapter of how we do on screen.
It really does. How excited are the rest of you about this? Because this pledge is really leading the way when it comes to climate change content across all genres. What are you most excited about with what's ahead? Who would like to take that?
Well, I'm just excited about breaking out of the box marked climate programming and into the mainstream, because that's what we've all got to do. And you know, TV is brilliant at this. You know, there are huge challenges. This challenge can seem impossible, and you can take more of a fatalistic view on it. But we've got to bring hope and accessibility and practical ideas for what to do, just to bring things to life for people. But the good news is that we've been doing it all together for many decades. I mean, look at Stand Up to Cancer on Channel 4, look at Comic Relief on the BBC, look at Britain Get Talking on ITV and STV, look at what Sky Sports has done to normalise discussion of prostate cancer among men. Look at COVID. we can do this together in a way that isn't hectoring and isn't patronising, but is practical and warm and uplifting, I think.
Absolutely. Are we going to have a Stand Up for the Planet, a Planet in Need telethon?
I don't know. We'll have to discuss that afterwards. But I think, like, I'm a scientist, so I obviously believe in this. I'm literally a scientist. Yeah. I was, but now I'm television. But I think there's a collective responsibility on us as CEOs, like, because we are in a position of power, because we have the ability to put things in the media that influence consumer behaviour, right? And I sort of think you hear that in different ways from all of us, because we have to look at the facts and what our responsibilities are as running businesses, but we're running particular businesses. So now we've cleaned up our own organisations over 10 years, as you've heard. The question is now, what can we do to influence the behaviour of the population? Because we have the ability to do that. We have to do it in the right way. You know, exactly as you're hearing from Carolyn, you have to do it in a way that's not lecturing or hectoring. But we can do that in a way that makes massive, massive impact on the UK. So how do we do that across all our programming in ways that's entertaining, in ways that's fun, in ways that makes it also accessible? You know, because the number one issue for young people is climate change. That is the issue that young people, we are worried about our mortgages and pensions and all that. But, you know, for young people today in the UK, it's about climate change. And the question is, how do we show enough practical examples of where people can tackle that, whether it's Vegan Week on Bake Off or sustainable building materials in grand designs. They're the examples of that continually that mean people can make change in their lives. And we've got a responsibility to do that as the leaders of the media companies.
And you've only sorry, Tim.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd agree with every word I've heard. We are purpose-led organisations, and we believe in a positive contribution to society. And that is at our heart. And we're unashamed by that, by the way. And I think that all of us had to, you know, I think it does start with your own organisation. So the fact we've got clear net zero, you know, goals at the BBC, science-based targets. But if you walk around Glasgow at the moment, you get to the data is really interesting. You know, unless we together don't get climate change fixed, you know, the consequences are serious. And you can very specifically look at the steps you need to take to try and get to under 1.5 degrees of warming over this century. I don't think any leader or any organisation shouldn't be using their power to contribute to that change. Simple as that. The question is then what levers you've got to pull. We've got our internal levers. What's exciting about this is we are a group of people who've got these amazing resources in terms of public communication, public debate. We could talk about the BBC in terms of due impartiality, but this is not easy, some of it. It's going to be very difficult. There's lots of debate to be had. We can entertain, we can inspire, we can facilitate debate, we can show how things work in the real world as opposed to theoretical world. That's what we do through, you know, factual entertainment, Carolyn was saying, programming, you know, your podcast or a soap opera. This is, you know, reflective and representative of the real world. We're all struggling with it. I think the other thing we can do is inspire, finally. I mean, I do think, you know, our youthful natural history presenter, your colleague, Sir David, you know, at 95 knocking out Green Planet Just to Come, which is a truly jaw-dropping piece of work.
Stunning.
But it's stunning. And it makes you look at things differently. And you and I know he speaks passionately about this. You look at things differently. We can inspire in a way where you reset your perspective fundamentally. We've seen it happen with the oceans. We now need to see behavioural change on the back of that. But it's an incredible privilege to be running an organisation that can do that. Not many can.
And sorry, just on that, you know, we're talking very much about the UK, and that's right. But I think there is a point here, which is all our content travels. And so we can have an influence worldwide. And there's two things we can do worldwide. One is through our programming on screen, because some countries find this, we were talking earlier, some countries find this whole issue much more difficult. It's much more political in some countries, whereas actually in the UK, the vast majority of people have accepted that this is a need, this is an urgent need. And the other way, I think, is through production, where we are 100%, as Tim is, on our studios divisions, we're 100% Albert, but we're definitely not globally. And we have 13 countries that we have ITV studios based in. And so I think Albert can help us a lot with getting all of our international territories Albert accredited in production. So it's kind of the on-screen and the off-screen again.
Yeah, so you have so many challenges ahead of you. There's so much potential, both within sort of an industry as a whole that can lead the way, but also with the content. And I want to unravel a little bit more about, the content when it comes to your international audiences a little bit later on. But just going back to the content, and you've touched on it already, with respect to sort of dealing with shiny floor entertainment programs and soaps and magazine programs during the day. What are you sort of talking about? I know it's very early days about how that content is going to help you to reach that goal of reaching as many new audiences as possible who are not necessarily watching the more hard-hitting or the more natural history type of content that you guys produce.
Well, I think that's one of the great assets of bringing these organizations together. I mean, firstly, the pledge is about the goal alignment, right? And if you want to achieve something, you need goal alignment. I think everybody here is aligned on the proximity of the need. So that's why we've all signed up to it. What works for everybody, I think, is that by committing to this and being conscious of how we do it, we all have audiences that are complementary, overlapping, and in some cases a bit different. So if we all commit to it, we reach different audiences with the same reinforcement of message. So if you take, a shiny floor show or a Sky Sports broadcast of a big football match, if the audiences are hearing the same sort of messages in the way in which we've articulated, is the best way to slightly nudge the audience along in their beliefs about the importance of climate change, then over time it will drip through and people will change their behaviours.
Of course, the other way we can do that as commercial broadcasters is through advertising, and we've run a campaign where we've taken two of our biggest shows, The Masked Singer and Love Island. We've used the talent on there, and we've run a campaign this week about how little impact we can have with how we can have a huge impact with audiences but a small footprint, and that's the theme of that advertising. And I think we all have the power through marketing communication as well as content. We sometimes forget that when we only focus on content.
Okay.
And look at what's happening on the soaps as well. I mean, this week in Clean Up Soap Week, the biggest...
So they're all linked together. Tell me a bit more about...
It's very hard to get your head around.
Yes.
Because it involves you accepting that Phil Mitchell might not always be in Albert Square and that a doctor in Holby might be on the cobbles of Corrie. It's very hard to get your head around. But once you've done that, you're in.
But it's about climate change.
It's about, there are a number of interlinking stories between the soaps where different actors or different characters will pop up in different soaps, all around climate action. The biggest shows in the country. So if we can do that, then you can break out of this box marked climate action, environmental programming, and hit 7-8 million people every day.
Yeah. So on The Chase, I mean, I think this is brilliant because who'd be thinking The Chase, which is a quiz show. So they've embraced this, and they're going to have sections every now and again, facts about climate. I
can't even imagine that. How would...
No, well, Bradley will do it. I don't know how he'll do it, but he'll pull it off.
Bradley will find it.
He'll do it in a very funny way, and it will be entertaining, and actually it will get more people to remember the facts on a quiz show than it would do if you were doing a documentary, which was telling you the facts.
Until it becomes normalised. It'll probably stand out a bit, especially on a programme like The Chase. I can't imagine it quite yet, but that's
wait
the
and
point.
see.
Yes, I will be tuning in. Tim, this pledge is all about using creativity and storytelling and science-backed narratives to help to engage as many people on different platforms as possible. Some people might argue this is also politically controversial. How would you answer that?
Yeah, I think certainly there's loads of areas still for debate. I would challenge, I don't think it's politically controversial now. And the overwhelming consensus is that, we as humanity are causing global warming. I don't, there are voices on the fringes, but you look at, so in my view, when it comes to due impartiality for the BBC, we are now at a point where we have consensus around that, but then you do get into political debate around policy, speed of change, the social consequences. There's tough stuff to debate. And we will do that as the BBC. We'll be impartial about it. We need different voices. Part of the pledge is to get different voices out there. Yeah. So I don't feel this is stepping back from, questioning where we've got political objectives or differing political objectives. We'll get stuck in as ever, and the BBC needs to hold those in power to account, but also really get that debate moving. That's part of our role. I really don't think we're there to campaign for politicised objectives. But there is consensus around certain things in life where, as a society, we agree this is something we all have to do. There is common political will around that, and I think there's common societal will around it. You then decide, okay, how do we debate that? So, look, I certainly don't think this stops what I'd call flavoursome programming and lots of debate. No, I think it's good. I actually think there's loads to, dare I say, debate, argue about, interrogate. But the overall challenge, I think, is accepted across the board.
As a scientist, I'm at pains to make sure that as we debate the possible options, that the science is still sort of underpins how those debates develop.
And it is really important that, you know, it's really important that as a BBC journalist, you're not campaigning for political objectives.
Yes, yeah? But making sure that the scientific...
And that's clear. You're being driven by the data. You look at the science and, you know, you absolutely interrogate this. Because the other thing is, I think people are slightly confused by some of the facts, what's actually going on. What does that pledge mean? Is deforestation really happening? All these things. I've got 101 questions as I walked through one of the zones yesterday. I was thinking, just how much change are we really making? And I think, you know, we owe it to the audience to interrogate hard on that.
And to make sure it's such a complex subject, but to make sure they do get the facts underneath all the political debates about
and that's what television and radio, that's what we can do as well. We
Absolutely.
Can simplify the story to a point.
I think if you think of the history of UK television, there's always been a lot of different public service broadcasters here. And we've had many examples over the last 40 years of us working on campaigns together, right? Whether that be HIV, whether that be like Cross the Road with the Green Cross Code, whether that be like Don't Fly Kites into Power Lines. And there have been multiple things over time. You remember that, Tim, thank God. You remember that over time. Now, this is an example of what the latest thing is. That's very important. Then you can get into debates about the data and the science and which specific actions we should take. But the point about this pledge is we're going to work together in our own ways. Like, we'll do it at Channel 4 in an you know, we had a show of trash marches where people had to wear all their trash that they'd gathered for a week on themselves as they went through life. You know, that's very funny, but it brings the point home very clearly in a Channel 4 way. ITV have tremendous power to do that through soaps or through quizzes. The onus is on us now to work out how we get the messages that are very clearly agreed on out through all our shows in our different ways to different audiences, but also how we interrogate the questions for the audience about what's the most difference we can individually make.
Absolutely. Simon, we know that climate and eco-anxiety is an ever-increasing issue, and understandably so. And a lot of viewers want to turn on the television for escapism. So as we talk about infiltrating, not that's the wrong word, including the subject of climate change and creating a better, more sustainable future into all of our programming, how do we deal with that in a mindful way so that those people don't switch off? They're still on board and they begin to engage in the subject more?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because this is a very scary, complicated subject, and as I say, it's easy to be very downbeat about the future as a result. And you know, you look at the consumer research, and it tells you that consumers want to do things, but 60% of people don't know what they should do. And you look at under 25s. There was a study I saw the other day in the Lancet that said that 60% of under 25s were extremely concerned about the climate. The good news here is that TV is very good at normalising things, at bringing them to life, at making the complex simple, etc., etc. And that's exactly what we need to do. The soaps example is a good example, but for us, we need to look at our own individual audiences, play to our own strengths, whether it's comedy or using Stardust. For us at STV, we need to make sure we engage our Scottish audiences. So if you turned on STV last night, as I'm very much hoping Joe Biden did just before he flew off, you'd have seen a green ad break, Scottish Water, Zero Waste Scotland, ScotRail. You'd have seen straight afterwards a fantastic show on ITV as well about the Orkney Islands and the amazing example of tidal energy and wind energy and what that could do for the rest of the UK. Tonight, if you turned on STV, you'd see Don't Waste Scotland, hosted by our own weather hero. And you talk about not underestimating a weather presenter. We've got Sean Batty in Scotland. And I can tell you that going out with Sean Batty for the day is like going out with George Clooney, I think. He's amazing. He's big in Scotland.
Wow.
He's big in Scotland.
Impressive.
But what he's doing with our show is in a very warm, very accessible way, going around Scotland, talking to everyday people who are doing amazing things, simple things to change the way we live our lives. You know, using a bamboo toothbrush instead, not overfilling the kettle, not having an overly long shower. These are small things that we can all do to make a difference, and we have a real opportunity to get that across to everyone in the country.
Sean will be on a panel here at 2 p.m. if anybody wants to meet him in person.
Okay. Also, I'm also his agent.
Other weather broadcasters. Yeah, I'll be
Autographs
pushing back the queue for autographs. Stephen, can you talk to me a little bit about how you're going to engage your audience when it comes to understanding the behaviours that can help to solve our climate crisis?
Right, I'm going to pick up on the threads that we've already laid out, I think. So, I mean, of course, there's the campaigning bit, whether it be advertising and the way we advertise and the messages we send. You've got a Sky News, the daily climate show, first of its kind in the world, you know, bringing people's attention to the urgency of the matter, to making the programming that we do. You know, the latest Mark Strong's Temple has a storyline which includes climate activism, which is part of our responsibility and part of the nudge that we need to do, all the way through to, you know, running more of our sports broadcasts in a carbon neutral, if not carbon zero way, as we did with the Tottenham-Chelsea game, and Norwich, I think last week replicated that. You know, and that was at their behest. So the more we do these things, the more people, I think, the more organisations, leagues, clubs, etc., look at it and they think that is what I should be doing too, and then that thing creates its own momentum, and before you know it, everybody has made those subtle changes that change behaviour.
And have any conversations been had about how we communicate to the public potentially bigger issues, how they can make their voices heard in that arena, on policy level, sort of areas where the general public might feel they have no real role to play, you know, aside from their own behavioural changes? Have you had discussions about how that can be incorporated into some of your programming?
I think probably we've had individual discussions, so we've had ITV discussions about how you give more people voice. But I think we should probably talk about that together, so that's something we could take away from this, because I think that's a really worthwhile thing to do. Just going back to your point about anxiety and the amount of anxiety, the reason for that is because people are overwhelmed. So when they see floods in Brazil and they see floods in Germany, actually our production team was in Germany when it was flooded, it is this very anxiety-inducing thing about reality happening on screen, and people don't know quite what to do about it. And that I think is where we're all talking about how do we say anxiety is about control. If you feel you can control something, you feel that you can do something about it, you feel a lot better about it. So how do we as broadcasters give normal people the ability to feel that they can control things, that no matter how small the thing they do, your point, they are contributing to the greater good. So there's a really, it sounds easy, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to do in commissioning and in programming. But I think we're all very much focused on how we do that. The other thing I would say is that, you know, you mentioned Britain Get Talking. I feel quite strongly that we shouldn't segment this into one type of anxiety, which is about climate. It's kind of, the world is a fairly anxious place. It's about a load of different things, including the pandemic, emerging everywhere in the world. And so, you know, Britain Get Talking should be something that encompasses everything. And, you know, we had something like 9 to 12 million people took action and called someone as a result of Britain Get Talking, with Ant Deck behind it and other people behind it. And I think that we can always weave in, you know, whether you're anxious about this or that, it's about mental well-being, and anxiety is, you know, distressing is part of that. So we, you know, this intersectionalization effectively of everything we do, rather than it just being a climate action change bucket,
I think
is quite important.
There's a couple of factors I'd build on what Carolyn said, which is so important, which is, one is we are blessed with institutions that, and this is said with caution, but people do trust, you know, our presenters, the way, you know, the way we work across all these institutions represented. People come to us for information and making sense of things in a world in which there is just deafening, noise. In social media, I've written about this. It's a deep problem about how we as a society get trusted information. So, and we're in a battle. We've got a fight on our hands. If we really care about where we're heading, is where do I get proper information? The other thing is we've got, an assignment kind of referred to it, we've got an amazing set of different genres and different tools. So, what Morning Live does is so different from regional news. But the other thing is we also entertain. So to your point, I absolutely don't think we are there in our entertainment, our comedy strands, and the chase, and in the work we're doing to lecture. But there is something about just normalising behaviour. I don't find it weird that one of our quiz shows would work in that area, or soaps would show those behaviours, because that's how society is moving. We tend to move sometimes a little progressively in that regard. That's a good thing. It's not campaigning, it's just where society is moving. And the research is really clear. People want those solutions. They want to see movement, and they want to understand how to change their lives for the better. And I think we've got an incredible role in that.
I also think the thing about debate is very important, because I think, if 80% of people think that this is the right thing to do, there's 20% of people that don't, according to the survey.
Yep.
And I think we have to let the 20% have a voice.
Absolutely.
Because if we don't do that, we end up just polarising this, and 20% is quite a lot of people. So now that's a rough figure, right? But that does mean that there are people who have got a lot more questions that they want answers to, and we have to enable that debate, because if you don't have debate, you end up getting fixed positions that are polarised, and we've seen that in many aspects of our lives.
Which is what you wrote about recently.
Yeah.
It's a huge challenge, but despite the fact that our backs are well and truly against the wall when it comes to the crisis we're facing, there is something exciting about the potential of broadcasters like yourselves collaborating in a different way and engaging the public in a very different way now that the world is so different. And as somebody who presents natural history and science, I want to ask you about the conversations that are going on across the river when it comes to the need to sort of have a systemic shift and placing nature and well-being and education and gender equality and all of the big stuff that's been discussed, nature at the very heart of what we do and how we live, and how that might be incorporated in those messages in lighter entertainment, in magazine shows. The potential for a fundamental paradigm shift in how we do life. It's the big ethereal question, but is it something that we have a responsibility to do as broadcasters now in this very different world we're facing?
Well, if you look at the education system, right, all kids now, or certainly from what I can tell of what my children do at school, which is not always diligent questioning, but all schools teach reduce, reuse, recycle, right? That's the sort of basis of the curriculum, and it's not just in science. Right, they do that across all the lessons, and they bring it to life in many, many different ways. So kids come out of school knowing those are their three messages. And maybe the question to us is, what's the equivalent that we should be aiming to get consistently through our programming of things that are clear, that should be our goals and our aims, so that we're working together as broadcasters to make sure that we're being specific in the messages with things that aren't controversial but are the right goals for the UK. And maybe that's the next stage for us, to work out how we do that in a way that doesn't violate due impartiality and brings the 20% on board, and that we can do through multiple genres. Because that's the ability we have if we do that correctly, and if we do it by working together.
Your relationships as broadcasters have completely changed forevermore. You'll be in rooms together a lot more than you've ever been before with this goal in mind.
Liz, actually, you'd be surprised over the history, as Alex was saying. Actually, as a group, we'll have a good old fun in who's going to win at 9 o'clock slot in the evening, or this, that, and the other, or negotiations between us. But actually, there's a good history of public service broadcasters working together. Sorry, because there's nothing worse than a panel that agrees. But actually, there's a
It's actually refreshing.
There's a good history of broadcasters coming together.
Yeah, but you're right, though. I think genuinely in the last 4 years or so, I'd say we are much more collaborative than we've been before. And I think that's partly because of our role in society, and our role has never been really, since the World War, our role has never been more important because of the pandemic, but also when we pulled off BritBox together, we did something which was a national champion in the face of streaming. And I think that has brought us closer together, because we see there's a much bigger threat where, if you are a streamer, you have no responsibility You don't have to. You might program in a certain way, but you don't have to. Whereas with our remits, really it's part of our remit to be responsible about how we reflect and shape society. And we reach millions of people together.
I think there's that, and there's even more than that, which is we're all human beings living in the world today, facing the data that's coming out about the issue. We have the privilege of leading organizations that can make a difference. So I go back to goal alignment. I mean, it starts with the fact that you've got people who are signing up to this agreement because we're parents, we're members of our society, we care about the future, and we're in a position to be able to influence it. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
And actually, all our people want it. So, I mean, all of us will do our surveys internally, and the groundswell of kind of internal support for this is massive. So we can sign a pledge if all our people didn't want us to. I mean, the fact is they are totally behind this.
Correct.
How different is your sense of responsibility now that you find yourselves in these positions, in these different channels, when it comes to that? You know, you have a responsibility absolutely to deliver different types of programming, and you know, you have all these incredible creative plans, but now with this extra added issue that you're facing as a human being, as you mentioned, Stephen, you know, how does that change your role on a personal level and how you go to work every morning? Has that shifted, do you think?
I think it's shifted fundamentally, and in particular in the last couple of years with COVID. And of course, all of us have our own objectives and targets, and the commercial broadcasters around the table, you know, all have, you know, we have shareholders and we have profit targets. But we also know that when it really got difficult, you know, 18 months ago or so, that wasn't what our people were worried about, and they were worried about much bigger things and their families and friends. And we had to remind ourselves what was, I think, really important in life. And we know that in a couple of generations' time, when they look back on not just COVID, but what we're doing now, we're not going to be judged on whether we managed to hit our quarterly targets and our profit numbers, whether we actually stepped up and did the right thing for our people, but also for our businesses. Because this isn't pure altruism. It has to be said. This is also a commercial imperative for us. Because if we don't do all the things we've just been discussing, we won't be relevant to our audiences, crucially to our people, who expect, won't come and work for us if we are not talking about these things. Also for our shareholders. People often lament the commercial world, but I get a lot of questions from shareholders, I'm quite sure Carolyn does too, about what we are doing around the environment, around our social purpose. That never used to be a question that came up in shareholder meetings, and now it is top 3 questions that come up from institutional shareholders. So this is permeating everywhere, and that's a good thing.
Very good to hear.
I think there's a great responsibility as well because of social media. So 10 years ago, we didn't have massive platforms that promoted disinformation and misinformation. And now we do. And they have immense influence. And you know, Tim's talked about single voice and broadcasting to a group of people collectively so that everyone gets the same information. And in a world of social media platforms, that's not what happens. People get a stream that is specific to them and algorithmically driven. And we all know that misinformation and salacious untruths get a higher click rate, right? So all evidence shows that from MIT elsewhere. So therefore, the onus on us, trusted, impartial, and broadcasting the same thing to everyone is more important than it's ever been, right? There's many, many hoops that we all have to jump through about how we ensure that we continue that due impartiality and how we question. But actually the responsibility and the importance to society of our ability to do that, I would argue, is greater than it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Because people are getting untruths from elsewhere much more quickly, and that's extremely dangerous for this issue.
I just want to touch on your question at the top there, which is, I do think something profound is going on in terms of how we reset our organisations, because for all its faults, social media, this and the internet, you know, you can debate the pros and cons of the digital age, but I think this idea where you had a corporation and then you kind of just did the comms on top and presented your face, and then that was your key endeavour, is kind of gone. You've got to be, to some extent, you've got to be happy with what you're actually doing in your legacy and what you leave as a leader and as a group of individuals running. The BBC, you know, the BBC, we talk about it and we say, what do we want to leave behind? And that legacy point. Now, that's rhetoric at this point. So you then have to say, okay, what are we really going to change? the other thing is you feel that unless you've got, again, just echoing Simon's point, unless you've got robust plans, and I keep coming back to the science-based targets we've got, all those things, they're so important that, you know, the interrogation now will be on the data and how you perform against very specific things. And I think that really gets that's what actually gives me confidence more than anything, is that real numeric underpinnings of there's beginning to be a consensus around how leaders like myself are going to be judged. And that's really important. Not us judge ourselves and by others. That is a huge shift, We'll see how it goes. But
huge incentive too.
I mean, I've got a real practical example about the profound change. So we built a TV. You guys know about that. We were advertising it. We built the world's first carbon neutral TV, which was a shock to me when we did that. The fact that we were able to do that was a shock because nobody had done it. And the footprint on the planet from creation of manufacturing of that scale is deeply profound, and nobody had taken that mantle. So we sort of led it. And what's interesting about having done that is not having done it for its own sake. Your shareholders, the owners of the business, are willing to invest in the extra cost that it costs to create that product, as well as the consumer demand for it. I mean, we see it in the numbers. We see it when we talk to people about that. 5 or 10 years ago, had you done that, I think you would get shareholder approval for it because it's too expensive, and you wouldn't have had many people in the public saying, I care about that. So there is a move that is happening right now.
We just got a presentation to the BBC top team about how much energy television sets are using by brand. It's really interesting. I won't go too far on that, but
that's the scope 3 suppliers.
Well, guys, this guy's pretty good.
Well, no,
to put it mildly, but there we go, Stephen. Take that one. But it's really interesting. But I don't know how many people in this audience here have their television set on the echo settings within their own TVs that can radically reduce the amount of power. Well, those little things. But you imagine every household with their nice 60-inch screens now, whatever they've got. You know, if everyone gets to the more environmentally friendly, lower power settings.
Check your settings.
It's these specific examples. Suddenly, tonight,
that's one of the most
how much of a change we could all make with
just that. That's one of the most difficult engineering feats, to put a TV to half a watt of electricity when it goes to sleep. And then when you turn it on for it to come back to life, that's a big engineering challenge, right?
It's a whole different panel, by the way.
Yeah. Well, have we got another hour? I really do want to get to the questions from our audience, but one final question. I could talk to you all day. There's so much potential. It's such an exciting endeavor, obviously, and it's all about collaboration. And when it comes to collaboration, I believe that the plan is to involve as many international partners as possible, as quickly as possible. So what will that look like, Tim, in the future? And ultimately, what are you hoping to achieve together? I know.
Well, I mean, the others might want to observe on it, but I think it's not complicated. We start with this group, and it's a hell of a group. But it just makes absolute sense. I mean, Carolyn made the point about productions overseas. We have some of the same challenges. The one thing I'd say, the creative industries and these institutions around this panel are looked at around the world as leading edge. So when we meet our counterparts, you know, sometimes we're a bit tough on this nation of ours, you know, and the UK. But, you know, they look to Scotland and the UK and say, here, you know, we need to learn from you. So we are a place where people come to learn best practice. This is a great chance to do it. So I think I'll be talking to the European Broadcasting Union and others, and this is a great template.
I agree, and I also think there's much more scope for us. And Simon mentioned how we've done it across SOAP, which is an interesting experiment. Yeah. We should really listen to what viewers think about that. That will be an interesting thing. But there's scope, I think, to do things across all of our platforms, because that's very powerful. When we have done that before, it has had a huge impact. We've done a few things together. So I think there's scope for that. But I also think, I know we've talked a lot about content today, and that was part of the theme of this, but there is a really important thing about suppliers, particularly scope 3 suppliers, which are much harder. Those are things that are not in our direct control. And if we want to get our targets, net zero targets and zero waste targets, we have to influence those suppliers. And I think as a group, we have far more power and influence together doing that with our suppliers than not. So it's not the Googles, it's not the BTs and Archivas, it's the small, it's that long tail of suppliers that we all deal with that we can really, I think, work together on. And I think there's a forum for us all about best practice and sharing what's working and sharing what's not. And I think we've got to be very clear about what's not working with viewers as well as what's working. And the more we can share that, the better.
Well, you will constantly be revising, revisiting this pledge, won't you, as it develops. Okay, a few questions from the audience, both online and here. This is from Jeremy Mathieu. Do you think the creative community, both in-house and across the sector, currently has the knowledge to fulfill that pledge effectively? How will you support them on the journey of learning about climate solutions and communication? Who would like to take that?
I'll take that only because, you know, I think, well, I'll take that. I think there is a lot of will and a lot of awareness. I think there will be pockets, if I'm honest, of where that is much greater than others. And I think the only way, really, to facilitate that and make it something that is just at a base principle is to build it into the commissioning process or to build it into the production process. So the only way to do that is we've got something at ITV called a founding principle. So people have to fill out a form online which asks them questions about have they thought about a climate thing, have they thought about diversity and inclusion, have they thought about... So it just prompts them to think about things before they start a production process. So that kind of thing, I think. And then I think debate internally, doing lots of outside in, bringing in really interesting people that engage them, particularly on the creative side, is really, really important. Because I think the question is right, which is how do you make sure this becomes normal for people making content? Yeah. They've been doing it for years in a certain way, and they're very successful at what they do. And they're under a lot of pressure because, you know, a lot of people want our content. So we need to help them, and we need to create the kind of forum, if you like, for them to be able to do that.
As much support as possible, absolutely.
It's also about training, and here's where Albert comes in as well, because they do a huge amount of training across the sector, and in our teams we're about to embark on Albert training for every single person that works for STV Studios, including all freelancers that are coming on to shows that we've commissioned or that are being commissioned by colleagues that we're making. So that collaboration on the training front is important too.
Collaboration and support is absolutely...
But some of it's practicality, like little indies, it's difficult. It's difficult, costs money, we don't know it, we don't have a big team who does it, so it's up to us to provide support, the knowledge about how you do it, accept that sometimes it might cost money, and provide the practical examples of what to do. The will is there in all the companies.
But it's how. To be supported in every way, absolutely. Jess Search asks, focus on consumer behaviour is worthwhile, but everyone knows we can't get close to climate safety without huge system change, and that's about communicating to people as citizens, not consumers. Will nervousness of political engagement, with a small p, prevent you all from getting to the heart of it? Big question. Who'd like to lead on that?
Well, not for us. I don't think so. You know, we did a big climate change debate. We had the news Monday the 25th, a whole hour dedicated, you know, well in advance of COP, dedicated to people reporting from the Maldives, reporting from the polar ice caps, reporting from issues around the world. We've got to consistently thread that through, and we've always got to act within the rules, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the contradiction. I think it works at every level, which is, you know, you absolutely we've got a few people across the Clyde here working at it, but you need those big interventions and policies, but you also then need the CEOs around the world. We've got power. We're running organisations where we can lead, and to the point, it is beyond just. I do agree with the idea that this is more than just, you know, asking for individual action. It's also us as leaders. But what you're saying, I genuinely think, well, see, again, I'm cautious about it, because unless you see delivery against very specific targets, and you know, we are seeing some progress, but the fact is it's too slow versus where the science is going. So you have to speed up. And this next period is now critical to see whether leaders at every level, internationally, globally, but also CEOs, can deliver on these net zero targets that they've all set. That's going to be, I mean, there's very few who haven't got there, by the way. I think they'll all be there. The question now is being held to account. And what Simon was saying very interesting is I do think shareholder meetings, in my case, you know, the public, will be interrogated. The idea that we're funded by the public and not delivering against those targets seems untenable for me.
But also go and ask our teams of journalists, and we've all got them, whether they're going to shy away from dealing with big issues. And, you know, it's impossible at any day of the week to tell a journalist what to do. And yes, it might be received wisdom that this is here and it's happening and we have to face into it. But that's not going to stop the teams interrogating absolutely everything about it, including the solutions, including the pledges that have been made and whether they've been adhered to. I'm not worried in the slightest that we're, as organisations, will be shying away from those big issues.
I mean,
no, but I like the question.
Yeah.
I think I like the distinction between consumers and citizens.
Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting question. It gives us even more to think about because our role is both.
Agreed.
We have to probably be, we have to work within a framework on the citizen side, but it's totally doable. We do it all the time. We do it in elections. We do it with big, challenging subjects anyway. So I don't see it as insurmountable, but I do think it's a really interesting distinction.
And something that needs to be engaged in.
Needs to be
Absolutely.
thought
Very good question.
Inside it is happening. I mean, go back to the references on various research. You know, you're under 25, it's the thing that's top of your agenda. You know, we've done this in 5 European territories, you know, thousands of interviews. It's the number one thing on people's minds after the pandemic. It is happening in society. It's a fact.
It's happening. We're aware of all the challenges ahead, but how strong is your sense of urgency, considering what you've mentioned there about, you know, what's going on across the water? We know the facts. We're on a back foot here. How much of a sense of urgency do you feel to get this done as mindfully, with as much support, giving people time to adapt to this change that's needed, but also it needs to happen really quickly?
But I think we all get the urge. I think it is urgent. I think we are different in the UK, and we do need to recognise that. I think we are slightly ahead of some other countries in terms of how we're taking it much more seriously, where there's, you know, less debate about the why. It's much more now about the how.
Well, this pledge is testament to that. Your leaders, I
actually think that's one of the reasons we put in 2025 targets. So if you recall what I said at the beginning, I said some of our targets are 2025, which is only around the corner.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not about 2030, which still feels like quite a long time away. And I do think our influence on other companies, that systemic point, which is whoever we're working with, we can actually say, look, this is how we work, this is how we want to work with you, and if you want to be our partner, you need to come along with us. And that is very powerful because we have big contracts. So I think it is urgent, and I think for us to meet those targets in 25 and 30, we have to take action yesterday.
I think the audience, you mentioned a question earlier about the audience wanting escapism, right? But the audience don't want to be like disconnected from reality. Like, you want to be entertained, you want to escape things, and you want to have fun, but you don't want to not know what's going on in the world. So the question is on us is, how do we do this deftly? How do we do it so it's interesting? How do we do it so it's not a lecture that turns people off? But that's what we're good at.
Indeed. Perfect final words. Well, actually, no, let's just do one more question. Don't want to let you go. What does success, this is anonymous, what does success look like for the pledge, and how will you measure? We've touched on this, but, you know, the final sort of words of what does success of this pledge look like to you? If I can go down the line. Tim.
I think it's all in when we speak to audiences, they have a greater knowledge of personally what they can do to contribute to this, you know, enormous change. And they feel well served by us in terms of the debate, but also practically, they go, oh yeah, I watched that and I learnt that. Or did you see that I've changed and I've changed for the better? And that's what they expect from us. And that, there's all the things from the organisational side, but from this pledge to me, you know, if someone said that led to behavioural change, so that inspired me not to do this or to do this, and we can measure that. We can measure that. I mean, you guys have done a great piece of research on that.
Yep.
We can change. We can genuinely change it. We've got the power to do it, and I'm optimistic about that.
I think for every pledge we've got, we could build on that by saying how. So we could actually have just a key thing about how we're going to do that as a group. And I think then there's a qualitative and quantitative way we can survey that as broadcasters, not just as individual broadcasters, but as a broadcast community, about what the impact of TV has had on people's behaviour. And that is doable. It will just take a bit of time because you'll want to measure it over time. But I think that would be a good thing for us to do.
I think it's simply that, will consumers feel that we're helping them make change?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's two things. So firstly, we've all set our own targets, and we're all going to chase and hit our own targets. And the aggregation of that is quite profound. If you take the aggregation of what we're all committed to, and you think about that flowing through our suppliers and our partners, and the effect it has on them, that's going to flow through. And it's actually happening relatively quickly. 25 is not very long away. We've made a lot of progress in a handful of years. So to me, those things will happen, and they'll be very measurable. There's one extra build on just the behavioural change, because behavioural change is great, and we want people to do that. That's part of what we're trying to influence. But really, essentially, we also want people to think differently about how they use their wallets, how they encourage other businesses that are not these businesses to change their behaviours as well. You walk into a store and you make a decision to purchase something based on, how much commitment to the thing you're buying, the company behind that has put into the same agenda. And I think that's a layer upon this, which is a bigger outcome.
Final words to you, Simon?
It's a big responsibility. I would say success for the pledge is that maybe we're not here in 5 years on the same stage talking about tweaking the words of the pledge, because the big...
Don't make me ask you that, okay?
Because the big thing that TV is good at is normalising things. At the moment, we have to intervene to make a change, and that's right and just. But hopefully, in a few years' time, this will be normal behaviour, and we won't have to prompt people to think about how to produce shows or report differently. It will just happen.
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That wraps it up for this panel. A big thank you to my esteemed panellists this morning. And you heard it here first. It is a global pledge. So we do wholeheartedly welcome others in the industry to join. And you can watch this session back, talk about it with your friends, fix your TV settings, get them to watch this session back at wearealbert.org, and follow at wearealbert for more info on this initiative, what's going on for the rest of the week as well. I will be here again at 2 speaking to some of our favourite weather presenters about what we touched upon. Laura Tobin will be here as well, about their role in communicating the climate change challenge. But for now, thank you for all your questions and for joining us, and thank you again to my esteemed panellists.
Thank you.